Snow fell gently outside, blanketing the streets in soft white. The warm glow of Christmas lights danced across the living room, reflecting in the polished ornaments hanging from the tree. I had spent hours helping Mom untangle strands of tinsel and carefully arranging gifts beneath the branches, trying to make this holiday feel special, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this year she would see me the way she saw my sister. The scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of roast and baked goods coming from the kitchen, where my parents bustled around with an excitement that seemed almost tangible. I watched as Dad handed my sister the keys to a brand new vacation home, his smile wide, eyes shining with pride. She gasped, hugged them both, and squealed in delight, completely unaware or unconcerned of the tight knot forming in my chest. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the cheerful chatter swirled around me like a storm I had no shelter from. I forced a smile, clapping politely, trying to choke back the bitter taste in my mouth. My heart wanted to cheer, but every part of me ached as I imagined myself in her place, receiving such generosity. I had worked tirelessly that year, struggling with my own challenges, quietly keeping the family afloat in ways no one seemed to notice. Yet here I stood, invisible in the glow of their approval. And then, finally, Mom handed me a small envelope. My name was written in her careful, looping script. I tore it open with a mix of anticipation and dread, expecting maybe a note of gratitude, a token of acknowledgement, something that said, "I see you, too." But there was none of that. Inside was just a letter. No presents, no celebration, no excitement, just a folded piece of paper, weightless, almost dismissive in her hands. I sat there, holding the letter, my fingers trembling slightly. The sounds of joy around me seemed to amplify the emptiness I felt. Every laugh, every cheer, every hug my sister received felt like a reminder of what I wasn't getting. It was supposed to be a perfect Christmas, but to me, it felt like a performance I was forced to watch from the sidelines. I unfolded the letter slowly, my heart thudding against my ribs, unsure whether I was reading a gift or a judgment. In that moment, surrounded by lights, laughter, and warmth, I felt the coldest chill inside me. My family's joy wrapped around my sister like a blanket, leaving me out in the snow, unseen and uncelebrated. I wondered if they realized or cared how much that letter, that tiny, paper-thin acknowledgement, meant as little as it did. And yet, holding it in my hands, I sensed the first flicker of something else, a quiet resolve, a simmering thought that maybe this year I wouldn't stay invisible for long. I held the letter in my hands, the paper surprisingly thick, almost formal, as if it were meant to carry importance I hadn't earned yet. My fingers lingered over the envelope for a moment longer than necessary, hesitation knotting in my stomach. Slowly, I unfolded it, the crease of the paper sharp against my palms, and began reading the carefully typed words. At first, they made no sense. Fragments of sentences, vague references to properties, accounts, and responsibilities, almost as if the author assumed I already understood. "You were always too young to grasp it," one line read, and my stomach flipped. Another sentence hinted that something had been left for me, something my sister had received no claim to, but that it was now too late to act upon. My heart raced. Was this a gift, a warning, a test? I read and reread the lines, trying to piece together the puzzle they laid out before me. But the more I read, the more frustrated and confused I became. I sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. My mind raced through every memory of past birthdays, holidays, and family milestones. I remembered the way my sister's achievements had always been celebrated, how she had been praised, rewarded, and lifted up, while my own successes were quietly passed over. Could this letter be a belated acknowledgement, or was it a subtle reminder that I had always been overlooked? The ambiguity was almost cruel, leaving me suspended between hope and hurt. Anger began to swell beneath the initial confusion. How could they leave me with just words, something so intangible, while showering my sister with luxury and attention? I thought of all the times I had sacrificed, all the ways I had tried to prove myself worthy, only to be met with indifference. My chest tightened, and a cold wave of isolation washed over me. Yet, amid the shock, a strange awareness began to creep in. There was power here, hidden, if I could only understand it. The letter wasn't just a slight, it was a clue. I folded it carefully, almost reverently, as if holding onto it might somehow reveal its secrets. I couldn't shake the feeling that this small sheet of paper had shifted something deep inside me. For the first time, I saw a possibility, a way to change the narrative, to assert myself in a family that had long ignored me. The initial hurt still lingered, sharp and raw, but it was now intertwined with a simmering determination. What my parents had overlooked, what my sister had been blind to, might just become my leverage. As I sat there with the letter still clutched in my hands, memories began to surface. Sharp and unrelenting, I remembered my 10th birthday, when my sister received a brand new bicycle adorned with a glittering bow, while I got a set of worn-out books I had read a dozen times. I had tried to smile, to act grateful, but the disappointment had settled in my chest like a stone. It wasn't just gifts, it was the way every accomplishment of hers was celebrated, praised, and amplified. While mine barely earned a passing glance, I remembered the science fair in middle school. She had built a model volcano that erupted with bright orange lava, and my parents had clapped, taken pictures, and called all our relatives to admire her. Meanwhile, my own project, a carefully researched demonstration on renewable energy, had been met with a polite "good job," and then quickly forgotten. Even when I stayed up late, sacrificing sleep to excel, it seemed invisible. The contrast between her accolades and my overlooked effort burned in me with every recollection. Holidays were no different. At Christmas, she would receive the most extravagant presents, the ones I had dreamt about for years, while my own gifts seemed chosen out of obligation, lacking thought or excitement. I remembered sitting at the dinner table, biting my tongue as my sister unwrapped yet another luxury item, my own package a quiet afterthought. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that love wasn't measured in gifts. But the sting of iniquity was impossible to ignore. Even in moments of crisis, she was prioritized. When she had sprained her ankle, the house revolved around her comfort, her needs, her every whim. When I had stayed up nights nursing a sick relative, ensuring everyone else slept soundly, there was no praise, no recognition, just silent expectation that I would continue to give without acknowledgement. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a systematic erasure of my contributions, a quiet message that I mattered less. I shook my head, overwhelmed by the clarity of it all. Every slight, every overlooked success, every moment of being treated as second best flashed before me, forming a pattern impossible to dismiss. And yet, as the memories stung, they also ignited a fire. The unfairness was no longer just something to endure. It was a roadmap. If they could elevate her so publicly, ignoring me entirely, perhaps the scales could be shifted. Perhaps the family that had celebrated her every move would soon see that I was no longer invisible. That evening, the dining room was a scene of perfection. Polished silverware, steaming dishes, laughter echoing from every corner. I sat at the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, smiling when required, nodding at jokes, all while my chest tightened with quiet fury. Every glance my sister received from my parents seemed exaggerated, as though the world itself paused to admire her, while I existed only in the spaces between their attention. A toast was made to her new vacation home, and I clinked my glass politely, the metallic sound hollow in my ears. I caught my mother's subtle smirk when my sister recounted an anecdote about her recent shopping spree. My father laughed at her every word, eyes never meeting mine. It was the small things, the way my plate was refilled last, the way she was asked for opinions first, the way a compliment was effortlessly given to her while mine felt obligatory. Each tiny slight accumulated, invisible to anyone else, but sharply clear to me. But beneath the surface, a quiet defiance began to take shape. I corrected a minor error in conversation, a slip my sister had made, with perfect calm, letting her stumble slightly before offering help. I caught myself thinking, They don't know who they're messing with. That thought looped in my mind, a private mantra, as I carefully navigated the rest of the evening. Every word I spoke, every subtle action, became measured, deliberate or silent assertion of my presence in a family determined to overlook me. I noticed the way my sister reached for the dessert I had planned to take, and I allowed her the first bite, hiding my irritation behind a practiced smile. Internally, though, I cataloged each slight, each small injustice, each opportunity where the balance of attention could be shifted. Every laughter, every compliment she received only solidified my resolve. While outwardly compliant, I was quietly gathering strength, planning my moments of reclamation. By the end of dinner, I felt a flicker of empowerment in the midst of the humiliation. This wasn't over, and the world my family saw was not the only world I inhabited. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house fell into silence, I sat alone at my desk, the letter still open before me. Its words had settled into my mind like seeds, and now it was time to see what could grow from them. I began methodically mapping out the family's assets, their habits, and the subtle ways they wielded influence. I traced bank accounts, property deeds, social connections, everything they assumed I didn't notice, everything they thought I couldn't access. I realized that while my sister flaunted privileges, her success depended entirely on their continued support and blind faith in her. Every birthday gift, every lavish vacation, every social announcement had left a trail I could follow. I started making notes of weak points, investments my parents rarely discussed, overlooked responsibilities, and social situations where I could subtly assert control. With each discovery, my confidence grew. It wasn't just about reclaiming what had been ignored, it was about showing them the balance of power could shift. And I would be the one to shift it. FOMO crept into my thoughts as well. I imagined them realizing, too late, that their favoritism had left a blind spotter child they had underestimated, overlooked, and assumed incapable of action. That fear, unspoken and palpable, energized me. I pictured the social status dynamics, imagining their pride, and the subtle embarrassment I could orchestrate without ever seeming overtly confrontational. Every detail I noted, every plan I sketched in my journal, reinforced the growing certainty that I was no longer invisible. By the time dawn broke, I had formed the skeleton of a strategy, calculated, patient, and deliberate. It wasn't reckless or vengeful in the traditional sense. It was intelligent, precise, and designed to ensure that when the moment came, the family would finally recognize that I had always been more than they gave me credit for. For the first time in years, I felt an intoxicating blend of clarity and purpose. The seeds of strategy had been planted, and I was ready to nurture them into something unstoppable. A week later, we gathered for an informal family brunch. Nothing elaborate, just pancakes and coffee on a Sunday morning. My sister arrived, radiant as always, eager to recount her latest vacation home stories, her voice carrying through the kitchen as my parents hung on every word. I stayed quiet at first, observing, letting her bask in the attention, storing each word like fuel for the plan forming in my mind. Then, as she casually mentioned a financial decision her parents had boasted about, I felt the opportunity open before me. I actually crunched the numbers for that investment last night, I said, voice calm but deliberate. If you adjust for property taxes and maintenance fees over 5 years, the projected returns are lower than expected, and there's a better option in the same market. My parents froze mid-sip, forks suspended in the air. My sister blinked at me, momentarily disarmed, her confident smile faltering as she processed my words. The room's air shifted subtly, charged with disbelief. I explained my reasoning, citing details I had carefully researched, projecting confidence and calm authority. My sister fumbled through a response, trying to recover her narrative, but the edge of doubt had already crept into her expression. My parents exchanged glances, a flicker of admiration or perhaps surprise passing between them. They had always assumed my sister would shine effortlessly while I remained in the background. But here I was, articulating knowledge and insight they hadn't expected, quietly challenging the dynamic they had taken for granted. After a tense pause, My father chuckled, a mixture of pride and disbelief in his voice. Well, I didn't see that coming, he admitted, while my mother's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. My sister's cheeks flushed slightly, and she muttered, almost under her breath, okay, fair point. I let the moment linger, savoring the subtle shift in energy. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or overt victory, but it was the first taste of acknowledgement, a small reversal of roles that felt monumental. As we moved on with the meal, laughter resuming, I felt a quiet thrill simmering inside me. I had proven, without arrogance or aggression, that I was more capable than they assumed. My sister's confidence wavered, my parents' perception had shifted, and for the first time, I sensed the beginnings of real leverage. That brunch, ordinary on the surface, had become the first step in tipping the balance, a reminder that even the smallest acts of competence could carry the weight of revenge. A few days later, I scrolled through my social media feed, expecting the usual posts. But my stomach tightened as I saw her again, my sister smiling broadly in every photo, lounging in her vacation home, champagne glass in hand, oblivious to the world beyond her curated images. Every post was a celebration of her privilege, a parade of opulence I had long been denied. The captions were subtle but sharp, each one carrying an unspoken message: success, approval, superiority. And in one photo, she tagged me jokingly, calling me the sibling who never leaves the couch, a mockery thinly veiled as humor. I closed the phone briefly, taking a deep breath, forcing myself to keep my composure. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I knew that losing control would only feed the narrative she and my parents had created. I reminded myself of the lessons from our brunch, of the first small power reversal, and let the frustration transform into strategy. I began cataloging her patterns, the ways she flaunted her assets, the people she leaned on, the vulnerabilities she exposed by living in such a showy, careless manner. Each post became a piece of a larger puzzle. I noted the extravagant dates she took, the interactions with friends and colleagues, the habits she assumed were unnoticed. Her hubris was a double-edged sword. While she reveled in her perceived superiority, she left traces of weakness, moments I could exploit. The more I watched, the more I realized how predictable she had become, how blind she was to anyone who might quietly observe and prepare. By the end of the night, I felt a mixture of outrage and anticipation. The anger sharpened my focus, but the anticipation was sweeter, a calculated plan forming in my mind. I would maintain my outward calm, letting her arrogance continue to shine, all while positioning myself for a reversal that would land at exactly the right moment. For now, patience was key. Her hubris was a gift I intended to use carefully, a mirror reflecting the overconfidence I could quietly dismantle when the time was right. Late that night, I pulled the letter from where I had tucked it into my drawer, its edges now worn from repeated handling. I spread it out on the desk, staring at the typed words as if they were a map I had only just begun to understand. Something had been gnawing at me since the first read-through, a feeling that the letter wasn't just a token, it was a key. I reread every line, every phrasing, every carefully placed comma, searching for hidden meaning, a loophole, anything that my parents might have assumed I wouldn't notice. And then it hit me. Buried within the formal sentences were subtle hints, mentions of accounts, trusts, and responsibilities that had been vaguely assigned to me, but never fully acted upon. They had written as if it were too late, as though the chance had passed. But I realized that too late was subjective. They had underestimated my ability to act, to understand, to take control. The possibility unfolded before me like a secret door, a concealed opportunity that had been intentionally obscured under their assumption of my inaction. I began jotting down notes, cross-referencing every financial and legal reference I could uncover. There were oversights, gaps, and unclaimed shares that had been ignored, either by design or negligence, and now they were mine to navigate. I felt the first surge of excitement and adrenaline. This was more than a letter. It was a roadmap, one my sister had never seen, one my parents had assumed I would ignore. The tension in my chest shifted from hurt to anticipation, each discovery heightening my sense of potential power. By the time dawn began to filter through the curtains, I had pieced together a preliminary strategy. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't public, but it was precise and deliberate. Every move I would make was calculated, designed to correct the imbalance, to reveal the opportunities they had thought were forever hidden. The letter, so simple and dismissive on the surface, had become the foundation for a reversal I could execute with patience, skill, and the satisfaction of knowing they had never imagined I would. I started small, deliberately. I booked a dinner with an old colleague who owed my father a favor and listened more than I spoke, letting casual questions about investments and property slip into conversation. I made introductions that seemed innocuous, bringing up a developer at a charity auction, mentioning a mutual connection at a neighborhood board meeting, but each seed planted had a purpose. It felt medicinal to move from rage to action, turning resentment into strategy, and giving my restless mind something constructive to hold. At night, I rehearsed conversations, the lines I would use to sound accidental when the moment came. I told myself, out loud, it's not about hurting them, it's about balance. Sometimes I believed that. Other times I admitted the darker satisfaction of watching them squirm. The moral conflict sat with me like a quiet companion, whispering cautions and fuel in equal measure. I did not want to become petty, but I also could not accept a lifetime of being overlooked. Justice, in my mind, had to feel inevitable and measured. I reached out to Jenna, my oldest friend, the one who had watched me grow up and knew the family script better than anyone. Over coffee, I laid out the shape of my plan. You're not going to ruin their lives, she said. You're going to show them who you are. Her steadiness mattered. If you need me to front an introduction, to be in a photo, to quietly back you, I will, she added. And I believed her. Her support felt like armor, a small but vital guarantee that I wasn't the only one who saw what had been done to me. Practical moves followed. I updated professional profiles to reflect achievements my parents pretended not to notice, letting acquaintances comment and nudge the social narrative. I started attending neighborhood association meetings my family ignored. I volunteered for committees and built credibility where they assumed I had none. I wrote careful emails to property managers, not claiming entitlement, but asking pointed questions, probing for information that looked innocent. Every small action was deliberate, a patient reclaiming of presence that, over time, would look less like coincidence and more like intent. There were nights I lay awake debating the ethics of what I was doing. Would they ever understand why I needed this? Could there have been another path? I pictured my mother wrapping gifts, eyes soft when she looked at my sister, and wondered if she would ever see the calculations beneath my calm. Still, the memory of years of silence when I needed recognition pushed me forward. I was not seeking to humiliate for sport. I wanted the acknowledgement I had been denied, and the dignity it promised, proof that I had not been invisible, that my life mattered in ways they had refused to admit. One afternoon at the community center, I orchestrated a pointed move. I introduced a developer I'd been chatting with to my parents, framing it as coincidence. My father, always eager to boast about connections, could not resist a photo opportunity. The developer and I spoke about a small parcel near the vacation home my sister loved to flaunt. I watched my parents' expressions shift from casual interest to alertness, and felt a small, delicious thrill at the crack forming in their confidence. I kept records of reactions, raised eyebrows, lingering glances, offhand mentions of estate planning at dinner. These breadcrumbs I would follow. The plan was not a single crushing blow. It was a sequence of revelations that would converge, slowly tightening around the narrative they had woven for themselves. Patience was part of the artistry, and timing was everything. I imagined the eventual moment of clarity on their faces, the staggered realization that the child they dismissed had quietly rewritten the rules. I also protected my life from being consumed by vengeance. I kept up with work, accepted invitations I enjoyed, and allowed small joys to puncture my mission: a hike with Jenna, a quiet weekend reading, a compliment at work that felt real. The contrast between my outward calm and the quiet pressure I applied behind the scenes was my armor. I had become both patient architect and actor, performing normalcy while rearranging the supports of a family that assumed I lacked ambition. By the end of the month, the network I'd been building began to hum. Connections whispered back with opportunities. Casual contacts offered insights into trusts and timelines, and my sister posted, blissfully unaware of the web forming at her feet. The payoff I envisioned stopped feeling like fantasy. It felt like an approaching event with a scheduled time. And when it happened, I intended to be ready. Soon, everything I'd planned would finally come together. It was the first weekend of summer, and my parents had invited the whole family over for an elaborate barbecue, the kind of event that always made me feel like a guest in my own life. My sister arrived early, brimming with confidence, her vacation home exploits already the topic of casual conversation. The smell of grilled meat and freshly cut grass filled the backyard, and laughter rang out as cousins chased each other around the garden. I walked in later, unassuming, arms empty, casual, as though I had come only to observe. The moment I had been planning for months arrived quietly. I had just finalized the purchase of a small property directly across the street from my sister's vacation home, a move no one had anticipated. The paperwork had been finalized weeks ago, hidden from view, but tonight, I had chosen to let the world know. When my sister mentioned her plans to host another party, I casually replied, "Funny, I was thinking of throwing a little get-together at my place next weekend." She froze, smile faltering, and I noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. Conversations paused. My parents looked at me with mild curiosity at first, then confusion. I smiled, letting the pause stretch. "It's just down the street, actually," I added, and let the implication settle. The murmurs began. Neighbors who had been invited, friends who knew the neighborhood, eyes widening, whispers of surprise. I explained the location, mentioning casually that the property had been a rare find, one that required both timing and knowledge of the market. My sister's face flushed as she realized, slowly, that I had not only caught up, but had overtaken her in something she considered her domain. My parents' reactions were priceless. Dad's eyebrows shot up, a mixture of disbelief and cautious pride, while Mom's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression caught between admiration and surprise. "You did what?" my father asked, disbelief in his voice. I let it hang for a moment before elaborating, describing the strategic considerations, the financial diligence, and the timing that made the acquisition possible. My sister's usual smugness was gone, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability. "Whoa," my sister whispered, trying to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded hollow. She had underestimated me for years, assumed I would remain invisible, and now the evidence of my success stood literally across the street from her prized possession. The juxtaposition was clear, a silent yet undeniable reversal of roles. I had quietly claimed a foothold in her world while maintaining my composure, and the shift in power was immediate. I could see my parents processing the implications. They had always believed her accomplishments superior, more visible, more worthy of celebration. Yet here I was, calmly demonstrating mastery in an area they had assumed she dominated. Their pride was tempered with surprise, their casual dismissal of my potential, and done in one elegant move. I felt a thrill run through me, tempered by the satisfaction of doing it subtly, without spectacle or need for dramatic confrontation. Later, during dinner, I continued to weave my presence into the narrative. I casually mentioned a few upcoming professional engagements, a charitable initiative I had quietly backed, and an opportunity to host a community event at my new property. Each statement was met with stunned silence or hesitant acknowledgement. My sister tried to interject, to reclaim attention, but every attempt fell flat. Her words drowned in the newfound authority I had asserted. As the evening wore on, I noticed the smallest details, lingering glances from my parents, whispered questions from distant relatives, the subtle shift in seating arrangements as people adjusted to my unanticipated prominence. I let them have their pride and chatter, quietly aware that the moment I had worked toward for months had arrived. The second power reversal had occurred not loudly, not cruelly, but undeniably dogged by the time the night drew to a close. My sister's usual confidence was replaced by tentative caution. My parents, too, had a new perception of me, one that acknowledged my agency and capability. I left the gathering with a sense of quiet triumph, the satisfaction of knowing I had claimed my space, asserted my presence, and demonstrated the strength they had long underestimated. For the first time, I wasn't just part of the family narrative, I was reshaping it on my terms. The days after the barbecue felt surreal. Every family interaction carried an unspoken tension, a subtle acknowledgement that something had shifted. My sister avoided eye contact, her usual brash confidence replaced with a careful caution that was almost comical if I hadn't felt the years of her beneath it. My parents, too, seemed caught between pride and disbelief, their words measured, polite, yet tinged with uncertainty. Even casual phone calls or texts carried the weight of unspoken recalibration. At dinner a few nights later, my father attempted to compliment me. "I see you've been busy," he said, his voice careful, as though testing the waters. My mother nodded silently, eyes flicking to my sister. I smiled politely, letting the acknowledgement pass without overemphasis. Inside, I felt a rush of satisfaction. It was subtle, but it was mine. I had earned the recognition without needing to shout, manipulate, or humiliate. Yet, satisfaction was intertwined with something more complex. I remembered my sister as a child, laughing freely, trusting my parents' guidance, unaware of the imbalance I had endured. The mix of empathy and lingering frustration weighed on me. I understood that she had never set out to hurt me, yet her privilege had overshadowed my presence for years. I also recognized that my parents, for all their love, had blind spots, assumptions, favoritism, and an inability to see me fully. During a brief phone call, my sister tried to lighten the mood. "I didn't mean to make you feel left out," she said, hesitation in her voice. I heard the nervous edge, the crack in her usual armor. I chose to respond calmly. "I know, things just got complicated." There was no bitterness, only quiet acknowledgement. Inside, I felt both relief and sadness. Relief that I no longer carried only resentment. Sadness that years of invisibility had left scars neither of us could erase overnight. Walking alone that evening, I reflected on the events and their implications. My heart still carried the sting of neglect, the small betrayals and slights accumulated over time, but it also held a steady pride, a recognition of my resilience and intelligence. I had reclaimed a place in the family hierarchy, demonstrated capability, and created a space where my voice could not be ignored. The balance of power had shifted, and yet, the emotional landscape remained complicated. By the end of the week, family gatherings resumed with a new rhythm. Conversations were quieter, gestures more considered. My sister remained polite, but restrained, my parents more attentive without overcompensation. I realized that victory was not about obliterating them or erasing the past. It was about creating awareness, asserting presence, and reclaiming dignity. As I sat quietly one evening, letter and property documents tucked safely away, I acknowledged a bittersweet truth. I had achieved what I set out to do, but the relationships themselves remained fragile, nuanced, and forever altered. Months had passed since the climactic reveal, and life had settled into a new rhythm, one where my presence could no longer be overlooked. Invitations arrived for events I had never been considered for before. Colleagues consulted me for advice, and even distant relatives seemed to regard me with a respect that was long overdue. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that every action I had taken, the research, the planning, the strategic patience, had culminated in recognition I had once thought impossible. I had not only claimed a place in the family hierarchy, but also carved out independence that no one could diminish. The letter, once a source of confusion and hurt, now felt prophetic. What my parents had dismissed as too late had become my opportunity, a catalyst for change. I realized that the FOMO I had observed in them, the subtle fear of being outmaneuvered, the realization that they had underestimated me, was part of a karmic equilibrium I had earned. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice in its quietest, most satisfying form. The universe, or perhaps life itself, had allowed me to correct the imbalance without cruelty, proving that patience, intelligence, and resilience were more powerful than immediate gratification. I often reflected on my sister, the person who had unintentionally catalyzed this transformation. There was no malice in my heart toward her, only recognition that her privilege had shaped the path I had to take. She had learned, subtly, that the world does not guarantee dominance to those who assume it. Our interactions were still tinged with tension, but there was now mutual acknowledgement. She saw me, finally, and I understood her place as a sibling with her own journey. The social hierarchy that had favored her for so long had been tempered, and I felt an odd combination of satisfaction and empathy, proof that justice need not annihilate, only recalibrate. Even my parents were changed. They complimented me openly, engaged me in discussions about family decisions, and allowed me to assert influence without hesitation. Their pride was tinged with humility, an acknowledgement that they had misjudged me, that the quiet, patient child they overlooked had grown into someone capable of careful, measured impact. I forgave their oversights, not entirely, perhaps, but enough to reclaim my peace. Recognition, in this sense, was sweeter than revenge. I did not need public spectacle or humiliation. I had achieved moral victory, independence, and self-respect. There were moments of quiet reflection when I looked back at the years of subtle neglect, favoritism, and dismissals. I acknowledged the hurt, the anger, and the loneliness I had endured. And yet, I also recognized the growth that had forced within me the intelligence, the strategic thinking, the patience, and the self-awareness I would never have developed otherwise. Life had demanded resilience, and I had responded. In that response, I found empowerment, a sense of control, and, most importantly, a deep understanding of my own worth. Bittersweet though it was, the transformation taught me that family dynamics are rarely simple. Bonds of love, history, and loyalty coexist with tension, jealousy, and misunderstanding. I had not erased the past, but I had reshaped the present, creating a space where I was seen, heard, and acknowledged. Standing on the balcony of my own property one evening, watching the sunset across the neighborhood, I realized that vindication was not a momentary thrill, but a lasting awareness of agency, moral clarity, and earned respect. I had grown, matured, and reclaimed myself not by breaking others, but by elevating my own life in ways they had never imagined. In the end, I carried both satisfaction and humility, understanding that power and recognition are fleeting unless tempered by patience, empathy, and intelligence. The family I had once felt powerless within remained complex, imperfect, and sometimes frustrating, yet I could now navigate it with confidence. I had learned that true justice often comes quietly, measured and deliberate, and that redemption, when earned through resilience and foresight, is sweeter than any immediate revenge. The letter, the small overlooked opportunities, and my careful strategy had brought me full circle, from invisible to indispensable, from disregarded to respected, and from hurt to whole.